Hi. So I haven't done a video in a while. This one's going to be a little bit different because it's about a project I've been working on. And I'll get to a little bit more of the hiatus maybe in another video. But what I'd like to talk about today is a really unusual piece of music. And it's not one of mine. It's something that I've been working on a performing edition of. And I'll go back and I'll basically tell the story. As a young composer, really the first book on composition I ever got was Cecil Forsyth's Orchestration. I've had this book in my collection 25 years. And if you do not know Forsyth's Orchestration, it's a fantastic book. It's actually humorous. It's not meant to be read like a dry textbook. It's actually some of the inspiration for my own books. And Forsyth gives a lot of great examples, but there's one piece in here that just struck me as odd that he used for a lot of excerpts. And it's a piece by the composer Joseph Holbrooke. By the way, I can't spell Holbrooke's name because he spelled it differently every time. Josef, Joseph, and then Holbrooke he spelled with or without an E at the end. I think we'll settle on the standard spelling of Joseph and then E at the end of Holbrooke. But anyway, Forsyth talks about this piece called Apollo and the Seaman. And I better make sure I'm pronouncing that very carefully. But he uses it when he's talking about saxophones, particularly saxophones in the orchestra. And this caught me. It's like, we've got this piece that uses saxophones in the orchestra, and I don't know it. Well, come to find out, nobody knows it. The piece has been performed twice. Really, it's more like one time because it was a concert, then a concert night or so later. So we've had one performance of it, and that performance was pretty much a disaster. And the more I read about the piece, the more fascinated I get by it. It's from 1908, so it's 110 years old as of this year. It's Holbrooke's second symphony. He titles it a dramatic symphony. And today, we see the word dramatic all the time, but at the time, this piece was groundbreaking. In fact, here's the premise behind it. Holbrooke's friend, Herbert Trench, wrote this metaphysical poem, a long-form poem, called Apollo and the Seaman. And it's about the Greek god Apollo appearing to a merchant, a sailor. And I've actually not read the entire poem. I've read bits and pieces of it. I have it here, though. This is the actual full score. You can find the full score of this on IMSLP. IMSLP is one of the greatest websites in existence. If you do not know it, go there and just nerd out on all the music scores you can get for free. Anyway, so the performance was a disaster because it is a multimedia work, meaning that essentially what was going on is what we would consider today just a big PowerPoint presentation. There was a slideshow that went with it in 1908. This is before movies were a thing. Essentially, this is the very first film score. We would have a screen that was dropped down in front of the orchestra. The orchestra was completely hidden and put in the dark except for little lamps onto the music stands. And it was a big orchestra plus a big male choir. In fact, at the performance there were 400 performers there. Male choir and then an orchestra of about 100. And the audience was not really prepared for it to see what was essentially a giant movie screen. This is right at the dawn of movies. You can have a few smaller movies at this point, but not something that's going to be a full hour long. This is unheard of. So you'd have a projector out in the audience projecting the images up on the screen. Now, it wasn't moving at this point, but it was essentially a PowerPoint with the text of the poem projected up there with images as well. We know at least that the image of Apollo himself appeared on the screen. The slides, as far as I know, have been lost, and really, the whole piece has been forgotten. 110 years, it has not been performed. So I'm seeing all these weird excerpts from it in here for saxophone, for sarrusophone, for alto clarinet, and E-flat clarinet. I start looking at it and say, I need to look at this piece. There's something special about it. So I've got the score and started looking at it, and then I looked at the second movement. And the second movement's interesting because there are no strings in it. That's interesting. Pieces for winds alone at this time were not common. In fact, we don't have a lot of serious wind music of this particular era that's not really intended for like a small chamber group. But what we have here is essentially an entire wind band. And in fact, that's exactly what it is. It's a band piece, the second movement. Now, it's only about 3.5 minutes long. And what I've done is I've taken that second movement and made a performing edition of it. And I'm still working on doing some of the finalized engraving. And in a moment, you'll actually be able to hear the second movement of Apollo in a MIDI rendering that gives some idea of the whole piece. And I have to say, upon finishing up the note entry this morning, it's a cool piece. So this thing should be programmed. It is a great piece to put on a wind band concert. Here's the instrumentation. Does this not sound like a band? 4 flutes, okay? 3 oboes and an English horn. More orchestral sound than band sound, but you know what? We can do 3 oboes and an English horn. E-flat clarinet, 2 B-flat clarinets, alto clarinet, bass clarinet. That's a band section. 3 bassoons and contrabassoon. Sarrusophone. E-flat contrabass sarrusophone. He actually uses an alto sarrusophone later on in the piece. Alto, soprano sax, tenor sax. No alto, no bari in this, but a soprano and a tenor. And 4 horns, 4 trumpets, 2 trombones, bass trombone. Euphonium, an actual euphonium part in an orchestral piece from 1908. Very rare. Tuba, percussion section, 2 harps, Celesta. That's a band score. In fact, the only thing separating it from modern band scoring is an alto and a bari sax. And so what I've done is I've taken Holbrooke's original score and I've cleaned it up. I've edited it down. There were numerous errors in the printed part. So I fixed as many of those errors as I can. I'm still going through and checking some of them. But essentially what I have now is a performing edition that can be performed by a band. I have not changed his instrumentation at all. So there's still no alto sax and no bari sax. I have left in the sarrusophone part, but the sarrusophone and the contrabassoon are essentially doubles of one another. So the whole thing could be covered by the contrabassoon. There'll also be a separate part for contrabass clarinet to cover the sarrusophone part if needed. But otherwise, there's absolutely nothing I need to change in it. And so I've got to do a little bit more cleaning up on the engraving, but it should be ready to go by the weekend. And what I'd like to do now is play you a MIDI rendering of Movement 2 of Joseph Holbrooke's Apollo and the Seaman.